watched any of my videos, you'll know that for me, kind of a first principle concept of how we think is that there is a calculation that we're always running. We're trying to estimate or understand the potential discomfort or pleasure that's going to come from any action or decision we make. We're looking at it and we're trying to say, is there going to be pain? Is there going to be discomfort that comes from this? Or is it going to be pleasure? And we run that calculation as best we can, and we go with the thing that optimizes for, it's a net positive, right? It's more pleasure than discomfort. That leads me to care a lot about understanding pleasure and discomfort, because if those, at least in what I believe in my hypothesis, those are the base drivers of everything we do, right? And there's a lot of work you can do, which I talk about all the time, about getting more clarity on that calculation, making sure you have the right inputs so that when you run it, you're running it at more of like a PhD level calculation rather than like a third grade level. And that's good, that's valuable. But there's also the component which just says, well, let's understand how are we even determining that something is causing discomfort or pleasure? A lot of that, oftentimes, that's just, it feels innate in us. Like we feel a feeling of that is discomfort. So now we run the calculation based on that. But what we're running that calculation really to make sure we're being sophisticated. We're thinking about short-term versus long-term discomfort and pleasure. We're thinking about the magnitude and the scale of it, right? Is this going to be a little bit of pain or discomfort now, but a lot more pleasure later? All that stuff starts to get a little more complex. Where I'm at right now is just, how do we even know? How do we even determine that that's discomfort and that's pleasure? Where does that come from? What is the root of that? Because that's really the base of it. And that's where I get really tripped up, and it starts to get abstract, and it starts to get kind of difficult to think about, right? Because you say, okay, where is that coming from? How does my body know that this thing is gonna bring discomfort? And there's obvious ones when it becomes physical. If your hand's in a flame, if somebody stabs you, if you break your leg, there's a biological, physiological component where, that thing happens, right? Somebody stabs you in the chest and that breaks your skin, and there's pain sensors, and that trips off certain, things that go off in your body, and you feel pain and all those things, right? But when it's mental, when it's psychological, it's a lot harder to get your arms around, because I get it, that same physiological response is still happening. There are stress hormones or other things released that makes it feel uncomfortable. But what makes your brain or your mind say that thing is bad? Release it. Release those hormones. That's what I'm trying to understand. Why is your brain even registering that that is a bad thing when it comes to a psychological thing, right? So you can have a family member who disapproves of the way you're living your life, right? Or maybe you get embarrassed in a certain situation where you look stupid in front of a big group of people. What is it at the base level that's making your mind say bad? Discomfort, avoid that at all costs, get rid of it. Or vice versa, right? Pleasure, good stuff if it's something good. That's what I'm trying to understand. And that's where I struggle, because as you try and work your way back and get to the root of it, get to the first principle of where does that come from? It's unclear, right? Take the example of being embarrassed in front of a group of people, right? So let's say you're getting ready, or somebody asks you if you want to give a speech, right? You want to give a speech in front of a big group of people at work. You're now running that calculation we spoke about. And as you're running that calculation, likely, for me at least, one of those inputs is that. You think about the potential for discomfort. What if I fuck it up? What if I sound stupid, right? What if that happens? And that would be uncomfortable. So, do I do it or do I not? So I'm trying to understand why in that input, right, that data point, that aspect of the calculation, why is that registering as such a big risk? Why is that registering as something that's going to bring discomfort? And you can start to go through like the initial level whys, which is like, well, being embarrassed is bad. Well, why is it bad? Well, maybe I have an inflated sense of self or ego, right? That's commonplace people go. To me, I want to feel smart. I like to feel like I'm competent and unique and special and smart. And if there's a situation that's going to shatter that and force me to think, consider, or face a reality that I'm not, that's bad for me. Makes sense, but why? Why is that bad for you? How does your mind know that's bad for you? Well, through learned experience. Okay, right? I've had situations before where that type of situation's come up and it's happened and it's felt bad. But that's not an answer. Why did it feel bad then? Why did your mind know? At some point, there was a first experience where it felt bad, to which somebody might say, well, no. That's hardwired. That's hardwired into your coding, right? That's just something you were born with, that's something you wanted to avoid. And you say, okay, maybe that's true. But then are we saying that the source of discomfort, right? The reason why our mind triggers discomfort is because something is uncomfortable. That seems too circular, right? The reason why we know something's uncomfortable is because it's uncomfortable doesn't register for me. And again, it's not like the physical scenario where you say, well, there's some external thing that's causing something that's triggering your brain to release what it releases. I mean, there is an external thing, but it's neutral in theory. Why is your mind registering it as negative and discomfort in the first scenario, or even pre-wired when you're born that way? Why did it do that? How did it even do that? How could it do that? And this is a little anticlimactic because I don't have an answer to this per se, but I think where a lot of people would go, which I get to an extent, but I'm just not sure it's the full explanation, is, well, there's no such thing really as true discomfort. It's all perception. It's all your expectations of what's going to happen. You've built up expectations. Now this goes away from your hardwired for this, I think, and it goes towards, well, you've built up expectations that you are a certain thing. You have an identity, or that things are going to play out a certain way, and when they don't, that's where the discomfort registers from. And again, I get that at a conceptual level, I get that at a higher level, but as you dig underneath it, it's very difficult for me to understand the idea that discomfort comes from nowhere, that it's not real almost. It must be real because we feel it, but there's no true source of it, is what we're saying, right? The idea that the expectations we set are the source of it, so you say, okay, just don't set those expectations. But at some point in our lives, I mean, I guess the argument would have to be that we started setting expectations at some point, right? Again, and now it goes counter to we're hardwired with it. So which is it, right? The way I always say it is like, who's driving this bus? Who's deciding? What's deciding? How is it being decided that something is out there that we don't like and something else we do like psychologically? It's just super confusing for me. And again, I understand there are some explanations, but none of them seem to explain it to a deep enough level. So the thing I'm planning to do, let's see how this goes, is maybe for the next week or two, anytime I have that feeling of discomfort or pleasure, I want to just dissect it. I want to really think about like, hey, what's happening right now? I feel something, what's underneath it? What is it? What is it? What is it? And maybe I'll come to the realization that there's nothing there. And that's what you'll hear a lot of people say. Once you get to that realization, you're free and everything's great. Or maybe I'll figure out what that base trigger is and now you can account for that. I don't know, but we'll see where it lands.